Are you locked onto their signature? Alrighty, whenever you're ready, beam them in. Well, hello. I take it that you're Zenith.
Hi. Can I help you with something, Linkara?
You seem to be familiar with me, but I don't recall meeting you before.
Oh, I'm a big fan of your show. Although this wasn't how I expected us to meet for the first time, that's for sure.
I see. That should make this easier. Can you explain to me how you got past my defenses twice in the past few months? The magic coin and this house have defenses placed upon them, you know. After Mechakara stole the coin and Aaron's attempt to steal it, I had Linksano make some upgrades to security. What I want to know is how you got past them.
I didn't. Chiaki did.
Your cat?
Well, yeah. She's the one who stole it in the first place. Once I got her back to normal size, I asked her to put it back once her sushi coma wore off.
I repeat, your cat got past my defenses?
Well, she is head of security for the Bun Squad. She can easily navigate past regular security defenses and firewalls.
See, that's not possible. This tech is far beyond normal security parameters. These are highly advanced systems from Lord Vice's ship. I highly doubt a cat could get past it.
Well, were they programmed to handle cats? I mean, Chiaki and Kana find ways to get into highly secure places all the time. Kana somehow managed to escape from the apartment one time without any of us knowing. We just found her sitting on the landing when we got back from the grocery store. I still don't know how she did it, to be honest.
Of course they were programmed to handle cats. We have cats in our house, and they're crafty little devils. One of our security measures was to prevent them from getting into the ceiling tiles because they somehow kept finding their way into the ceiling. Once we upgraded our security, though, that stopped happening. So how did one of your cats manage this? They didn't even set off the alarms.
I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. They're just two stray cats I found in the park one day. They just look so helpless, so I decided to adopt them. There's nothing special about them. Well, they can talk now, but that's unrelated.
They can talk? You know what? I'll save my questions for later because that is too much for me to process right now. Well, in any case, you said you're a fan of the show, right?
Yes, of course. That's why I wrote that note in the first place. You're a good man, Linkara. You've defended the universe from some pretty big threats in the past. The last thing I would want is to hurt your chances of winning the Contest of Champions. Can I go home now? I was just about to record a review of Kamen Rider W.
Okay, but I assure you we will be in touch. You don't seem like a bad person, but you've seen the show. Betrayal seems to be a recurring theme at this point.
Understood. I'll contact you as soon as I'm done with the episode.
Oh, and Zenith, I'd be careful around those cats if I were you. If they did get past my defenses, which I still don't entirely believe, they could have powers you aren't aware of at the moment. I've had experience with this sort of thing before. Best to stay on your guard.
I see. Well, I'll do my best.
They can talk. The talking cat. Nimue, please pull up Zenith's show in our database. I need some answers or my mind is gonna break, and we don't have the budget for another Combine Harvester segment.
Hello everyone, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and welcome to Zen Toku, where I henshin my way through the massive library of tokusatsu shows and movies. For those who aren't familiar with the term, tokusatsu is a Japanese term for live-action films and television shows that make heavy use of special effects. For example, the Super Sentai series, which was brought over to America as Power Rangers, falls under tokusatsu because of the special effects used in the combat. At the same time, the Godzilla franchise, along with the rest of the kaiju or giant monster films, also falls under the Tokusatsu banner. In fact, while Tokusatsu has origins in early Japanese theater, Godzilla is widely regarded as the first Tokusatsu film and the father of Toku because of the special effects used to create the monster. I'll be sure to discuss Godzilla in the future because, well, you can't talk Toku without talking about the kaiju who started it all. There are many different subgenres of Toku, including kaiju like Godzilla, kaijin or mysterious person like half-human, Ultraman, a series about a superhero which grows to giant size, and the Toei superhero line, which includes Super Sentai, and the topic of today's video, Kamen Rider. This is just scratching the surface when it comes to Toku, because there are so many different series and genres out there that could be considered Toku. I mean, there's even a Spider-Man Tokusatsu series where he pilots a giant mech. Yes, that actually happened, and it became the inspiration for giant robot use in Super Sentai. Tokusatsu has this weird spider-webbed history where one thing affects another, and it's led to some interesting experiments over the years. We will get to these experiments in due time, especially because I really am curious how bug-nuts Japanese Spider-Man is, but I think it best to begin with a more traditional series and work our way to the experimental. With that in mind, I'm starting this Tokusatsu journey with Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider, or Masked Rider as it's known in America, is a long-running franchise centered around a motorcycle riding superhero known as the Kamen Rider. The series began back in 1971 with the original Kamen Rider, college student Takeshi Hongo, and his quest to defeat the world-conquering Shocker organization. The series has evolved since then, with new riders gaining the power to henshin, or transform, into the titular Kamen Rider. As of this writing, there are 31 different Kamen Rider series, a trilogy of films that connect different eras of the franchise, countless different individual and crossover movies for each series, and numerous spin-offs in manga and other media. Kamen Rider is just plain huge, and there are many places one could theoretically start. I could have certainly started at the beginning with Kamen Rider V1, but the problem I have with that is finding the series with proper subtitles. You see, Masked Rider didn't do so well in America, and there are no official subtitle versions of the show. The Showa-era riders from V1 to Black RX all have the problem of not being easy to find with subtitles, aside from the 3 standalone films, which I believe were recently brought to America. The Heisei Era riders from Kuga to Decade are a bit easier, but Kuga is certainly harder to find these days, and you need to watch every single series in the first phase of the Heisei period to actually understand Decade, even though Decade is in a separate timeline and doesn't actually utilize the canon history of those riders. Yeah, Decade is weird and hard to get into for new fans of Toku. I personally tried watching the show to start off and was lost almost instantly because they kept referencing past seasons of Kamen Rider that I had never seen. However, with that being said, all of the riders of Phase 2, from Double to Zeo, are easy to find subtitled and function on their own for the most part. There are crossover films from rider to rider, but even then they are separated into 3 parts, one for the current rider, one for the upcoming rider, and one for both riders crossing over. So you can easily watch the story-specific points of one rider without needing to see the others for the most part. In addition to this, Double was recommended to me by several of my friends as a good entry point into Kamen Rider, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start from Kamen Rider Double, including the canon films, and journey through the decade to Zeo to get a feel for Kamen Rider. Then we're gonna go back to Kamen Rider V1 and make our way to Kamen Rider Decade, providing I can find all the material before then, and then we're gonna cover the crossover films as we head towards the Reiwa Era Riders. It's gonna be a lot, I know, but I know I can do it, and I hope you all enjoy the ride. With all of that being said, let's dive into Kamen Rider Double as we see what Kamen Rider is all about. Kamen Rider Double is the 20th individual Kamen Rider series, not counting the movies, and the first in the second phase of the Heisei period. Since I haven't personally seen any of the series before Double, aside from a few episodes of Decade, I can't tell if Double is largely a departure from Kamen Rider as a whole, but it is a shift from Decade, which was largely focused on celebrating the previous Rider series. Double, on the other hand, is primarily focused on telling a standalone story, and in that regard, I'm extremely happy that my good friend Mars Girl and several other friends recommended this as a starting point. For the most part, you can go into Double without any knowledge of Kamen Rider history and still enjoy it, and that is a big plus for me, since, until this point, I'd only seen parts of Decade and 2/3 of Gaim. There is technically one small hurdle to watching Double first, but we'll discuss that in a bit. For now, just know that you don't need any prior knowledge going into this series. Double is largely the story of Shotaro Hidari, a private detective in the windy city of Futo. After the death of his boss at the hands of the evil Sonozaki family, the self-proclaimed hard-boiled detective Hidari works to avenge his mentor, Chief Sokichi Narumi, and remove the evil that is polluting his city. Hidari is aided by his partner Philip, a mysterious young man with amnesia who is connected mentally to the Gaia Library, where he can access any piece of knowledge in the world, provided he has the right keywords. It's basically a Google search engine in his head, which is pretty damn useful in helping them track down the monsters of this series, Dopants. Dopants are normal human beings who have been sold items known as Gaia Memories by the Sonozaki family. These Gaia Memories contain the complete knowledge of one aspect of the world, such as magma, arms, violence, and many others. By using the Gaia Memories, humans can transform into Dopants, monsters with power far beyond human understanding. However, the more you use a Gaia Memory, the more you become addicted to it and start to show mental side effects related to the memory. Most people are taken over by the memory itself and lash out at the city around them, destroying buildings and lives in the process. However, with a special driver stolen from the Sonozaki family, Hidari and Philip can transform into Kamen Rider Double, a powerful hero that houses both their souls together in one form. Thanks to their driver, they don't receive any mental side effects from using their Gaia Memories, and thus they use their power to stop the Dopant threat. As detectives, they track down Dopants wreaking havoc and transform into Double in order to bring them to justice. It's up to Hidari and Philip to purge the city of Dopants and take down the Sonozaki family once and for all. There's a lot going on in the series from the very beginning, but I think the key strength of Double is the way in which the story is presented. While we get a brief flashback in the beginning of episode 1, most of the backstory for Philip, Chief Narumi, and Double are left as a mystery. We're given bits and pieces to the mystery in each episode, but a lot is left up to speculation until later on in the story. Double is essentially a detective noir story about a Kamen Rider who wants to be a hard-boiled detective, and that setup hooked me in from the very beginning. Yes, there are a lot of individual elements here, but we get the basic gist from the first 2 episodes. The chief was killed by the Sonozakis, and Hidari wants to avenge him. We quickly get an idea for what dopants are when we are shown a human transforming into the magma dopant, and we see Hidari use his own detective skills to track down the monster along with Philip's help. While there are some gaps left to be filled in, it ultimately gives us enough to go on, and as the story unfolds, we get more and more info about the chief, the Sonozaki family, and the mystery surrounding Philip's past. At the same time, we're also introduced to Akiko Narumi, Sokichi's daughter, who shows up in the first episode to find her father and claim ownership of the detective agency, unaware that her father has been killed. In many ways, Akiko acts as the audience surrogate, asking questions about what's going on, and getting slowly introduced to the concepts of the show, such as the Kamen Rider base hidden in the detective agency, and the dopant menace that the city faces. Having Akiko ease us into the world of the show is a big help, but it also introduces the question of when Hidari will gain the courage to tell her that the chief is dead and that it's his fault. The first third of the series deals with Akiko and the death of the chief, building up to the big reveal and begins night after episode 14. It's here where I have to bring up the only small hurdle of watching Kamen Rider Double: Begins Night. You see, while Begins Night is essential viewing for the show, it's not told during the series itself. Begins Night is one part of the Kamen Rider Double and Decade crossover film entitled Kamen Rider X Kamen Rider Double and Decade Movie War 2010. Dear God, that's a mouthful. Expect a lot of these when it comes to Tokusatsu, because the movie titles can get pretty damn long. The film itself is split into 3 parts: Begins Night, explaining the events leading up to Sokichi's death; Decade, the last story, which takes place after the end of Decade; and Movie War 2010, which continues both stories in a massive final battle. Here's the thing, I have only watched the Begins Night part of this film at this time. The rest of the film requires me to have seen the entirety of Decade, and I can't do that without having seen the previous Heisei Rider series. However, Begins Night ends on a cliffhanger, and the villain in Begins Night isn't defeated until the end of the movie. This is a conundrum for me, because Begins Night is mandatory viewing to understand what happened to the chief, who Kamen Rider Skull is, how Akiko found out about the chief's death, and how Philip joined the team in the first place. It fills in all these gaps of the mystery and is meant to be viewed at this point in the series, but it ends on a cliffhanger, and I still don't know how it ends. This is what I meant when I said this was the only small hurdle of watching Double first. If you don't mind being spoiled on Decade or ending on a cliffhanger, this is perfectly fine, but it was a bit frustrating for me because I love the Begins Night portion of the movie. It does a fantastic job of dealing with this backstory, and it legitimately made me cry by the end. It's a supremely entertaining story, but it's told outside of the series, and then it just abruptly ends, and I can't finish it yet. This, to me, is the only issue with Double's story, and it's apparently a common practice to include the ending or beginning of a Rider franchise in a film. It isn't necessarily horrible, because the film is easy to find, but it also makes it a tad harder to use Double as a starting point. Aside from this, however, Double does a great job of drawing you in, and the payoff to this first mystery is simply wonderful. I'll discuss the details of Begins Night later on when I discuss the spoilers for this episode, but I most likely won't cover the full movie until I finish Decade. Whenever that is. I'm not exactly chomping at the bit to watch this again, because what I've seen of Decade is weird to say the least. In addition to the mystery of the Chief, the first third of Double deals with the introduction of Double's powers, along with several dopants that don't hold much relevance to the story itself. It initially feels like a Monster of the Week show, with each dopant having a two-part story before they are defeated. The two-parter setup of each story is an interesting idea, giving us a feel for Double and the villain before they finally take down the dopant of the episode. It allows us to get used to Akiko and Hidari, and introduces us slowly to their Gaia memories and powers. However, as time goes on, Double starts to introduce larger narrative elements and mysteries at the beginning and end of each two-parter. We get introduced to the generals of the Sonozaki family who are trying to capture Philip, along with Kirihiko Sudo, who is a Gaia memory salesman. The secondary focus of the first third of the show is Sudo, as he marries Saiko Sonozaki and becomes one of their elite forces. Sudo's arc is a big aspect of the show, and a large factor of how things eventually change by the end of episode 18. Sudo is very much a dark foil to Hidari, and I will discuss this and his arc when we get to the character section of the review. The second third of the show revolves around a new character named Ryu Terui. Terui is a superintendent assigned to the Futo Police Department's Paranormal Crime Investigation Division. Prior to arriving in the city, Terui's mother, father, and sister were all killed by a dopant. When Terui found them, they were frozen solid and they shattered at his touch. As such, this third of the series is about tracking down the dopant who killed his family. Terui is consumed with thoughts of vengeance, and this causes him to be far more aggressive, willing to even kill dopants because of his anger. Hidari and Philip work with him to help him solve cases and also do their best to change Terui for the better. As time goes on, Terui gains the ability to henshin as well, becoming Kamen Rider XL, which is all about power and speed. He even has a kick-ass sword that can wreck anything in his path. It's pretty damn badass. At the same time, Hidari rushes in several times to stop him from outright killing dopants while they're in human form. Over time, Terui is able to set aside his anger and realize that protecting people is the job of a Kamen Rider, not vengeance. He eventually joins the team and works together with Double to take down the stronger dopants, including Dr. Isaka Shinkuro, the dopant who killed his family. Isaka holds the weather memory, which allows him to control various weather conditions at once, such as lightning, ice, and many more. He is a beast of a villain and becomes the focus for this third of the show. It takes the combined might of Double and Excel to damage him initially, and even then he gets away easily. However, what finally finishes Isaka for good is when Terui's thoughts of revenge are replaced with the desire to protect those around him. With this new drive of protection, Terui is able to master a new form for his driver and take down Isaka once and for all, changing Terui for the better. Look, he even smiles now. That is a major change. I'll touch further upon his development later on as we discuss just how awesome Isaka is as a villain, because dear God, I have a lot to say about Isaka. For the final 13 episodes of the series, we focus on Philip's amnesia as we unravel his hidden past and discover who his true family really is. Unfortunately, this section of the show is riddled with spoilers, so I will have to cover most of this in the spoiler section. The secondary focus is on the Sonozaki family as they fight for power. Saiko Sonozaki is deemed a traitor because she worked with Dr. Isaka to defeat her father and attempted to steal the Terror memory for Isaka's lust for power. Meanwhile, Wakana Sonozaki takes over as head of the museum with her father's blessing as she leads the rest of the generals. The two sisters fight for control of the museum as both of them obtain stronger power with their Gaia memories. Meanwhile, Ryobei Sonozaki, head of the Sonozaki family, watches from the shadows, laughing as his family tears each other down. It all leads up to a final confrontation with Ryubei, who is simply a titan when it comes to sheer power, capable of instilling crippling fear just by looking at someone to ensure they never attack again. If you manage to withstand that, he can transform his crown into a giant dragon, and just a flick of his wrist can send even the strongest Kamen Rider flying. Ryubei Sonozaki is truly worthy of being the final villain in every sense of the word. However, by working together with Terui, they managed to divide Ryubei's power and attention, destroying the Terror memory for good. It seems as if everything is finally wrapped up for good, but there's still one more villain to take down. Throughout this final third, a new villain known as Jun Kazu has been lurking in the background, aiding Ryubei. Kazu is the leader of Foundation X, which is the research organization that funded his Gaia memory research. Jun is seen playing both sides as he helps Saiko get revenge while also closely working with Wakana and Ryubei to further their goals. You see, Ryubei was the owner of a museum, and he believed that humanity would eventually become extinct, much like the exhibits in his museum. By producing Gaia memories, experimenting on other humans, and powering up Wakana and Philip with the power of the Earth itself, Ryubei was able to get the data he needed to create the Gaia Impact, which would allow humanity to become one with the planet and save them from extinction. It seemed as if Double put a stop to that plan. However, following the defeat of Ryubei, Kazu steps in and takes over Ryubei's plan to create the Gaia Impact. He gives Saiko back her taboo memory that had been taken from her in the previous arc, and the two work together to create their own version of the Gaia Impact. Now, I'm just gonna say right now that I hate this twist. The story was ready to be wrapped up. The final boss was defeated. Saiko's Nazca memory was shattered. The only loose end was Wakana, and that could have been handled by Philip going into the Gaia library to get her back. Instead, we have this new villain who is incredibly dull. He speaks in this awful monotone with no emotion whatsoever. He has this stupid quirk of dropping things all the time, which kinda makes sense in regards to his Gaia memory, but still is just lame as a quirk. Even his powers are cliche and boring. Kazu uses the Utopia memory, which revolves around the concept of wishes. He takes the power of people's dreams and ambitions and uses it for his own energy. He essentially has cheat codes turned on at all times and can defeat the riders with little to no effort. What happened to the majesty that was Terror? It was so different and unique and had tons of different abilities that made for a good final boss, but also made sense and had weaknesses. Kazu is just lame and overpowered. This is just an excuse to pad out the story further. I get why Foundation X was introduced, since they do become a plot point for O's, the next Kamen Rider series in the lineup, but here they feel superfluous aside from funding the memory research, and Kazu is the dull vanilla icing on that superfluous cake. I don't care about him. I don't care what he's doing. I have no connection to him like I did to Ryubei. It just is dumb to make him the final villain. Oh, and did I mention he's a zombie? Yeah, I'm not kidding about that one. In the second theatrical film for Double, which takes place between episodes 44 and 45, entitled Kamen Rider Forever A to Z, The Gaia Memories of Fate, a second project of Foundation X was introduced. Never. Never is a research project designed to create undead soldiers. However, the funding for said project was cut, and they decided to fund Gaia Memories instead. For the most part, A to Z isn't fully necessary to understand the last few episodes, and I will review the film separately in the future, but there are a few small things to note from the film. Undead soldiers are a thing, and they can only be destroyed with a maximum drive. Futo Tower was destroyed at the end of the film, which is why it was being rebuilt in episode 45. Also, Hidori was given a single driver by the ghost of the chief so that he can henshin without Philip. I'll discuss my thoughts on that when I cover the film, but Kamen Rider is wild, everybody. Anyway, those are all the insights from the movie, and so Kazu, in addition to being overpowered with cheat codes, is also a zombie, stealing a cool idea from the movie and just making it lame. In the end, Hidori and Philip managed to take down the lame zombie man, stopping the museum for good. From this point onwards, I will be discussing spoilers for Kamen Rider Double. If you wish to avoid spoilers, I highly encourage you to watch the show on your own or skip to this time code. Unfortunately, there are a lot of spoiler points to discuss, and they are heavily wrapped up in the character arcs and conclusions of each story arc. So please either stop the video here or skip to this time code. For everyone else, you have been warned. Let's start by discussing Kirihiko Sudo, the villain of the first arc. Sudo was introduced to us as a Gaia Memory salesman, but married Psycho in the first third of the show to become one of the generals. At first, it appears that he's just an ordinary villain, but there is a complexity to his character that I really love. He is fully in love with the city and wants to protect it. He was lied to by the Sonozaki family, who told him they were going to improve the city, but they were only using him as an experiment. He was never meant to use the Nazca memory, and eventually it begins to kill him. When Kirihiko discovers that children are getting their hands on Gaia memories, he fights back against the dopant and eventually the Sonozaki family itself. He approaches Hidori one last time, entrusting the city to Double before Psycho kills him atop one of the buildings. I honestly love the complexity that Sudo has. He does evil things that he knows are evil for the sake of bettering the city, willing even to kill Double in the beginning, but he does it out of good intentions. He wants Futo to stop being corrupted by the crime and the rest of its problems, and becomes a villain in order to be its savior. He protects children because they remind him of himself, and in the end, he realizes he's a lot like Hidori. He is a dark reflection of what Hidori could have been, if not for Philip and the Chief, and I really love that about his character. His entire character arc really gelled with me, and made him one of my favorite villains of the show. Next up, we have Dr. Isaka, Keeper of the Weather Memory. Isaka is my second favorite villain in this series, but for a very different reason. Isaka is not all that complex. We discover his motivation later on in the series, and it's very simple. He saw Ryubei in his full terror form one day, and his desire for that power grew and grew. Once he received the weather memory, he used that power to acquire more and more for himself out of greed. He is quite literally a glutton, as he needs to eat several times more than anyone else to maintain his power, but also because he steals more Gaia memories and uses their power as well. Part of the reason he's so strong is that he doesn't use a driver. Drivers protect memory users from ill effects, but weaken their power as a result. Instead, he inserts all his memories directly, somehow able to withstand the mental effects. That's why he's strong enough to withstand twin maximum drives at first, and why he keeps growing stronger. He just keeps gaining more and more power by absorbing more and more memories. The only way they're able to take him down before he obtains the terror memory is with the speed boost from Excel's trial form. I just love Isuka because he's good at being a straight up villain. He's creepy as all fuck, especially when he does that tongue flick thing. That's just gross. And the fact that he's a serial killer who killed Terui's parents gives a much more personal stake to the arc itself. Overall, I just love him as a character. The next villain on the roster is Mick, who is an evil cat that can henshin, and that is all I need in order to love him as a character. Mick is Ryubei's pet cat, and gives Mick a driver so that he can become the Smilodon Dopant. From what I understand, this is the first time that a cat is a villain in Kamen Rider, and all I can say is, why the hell did it take this long? It's just such a perfect concept for the villain's cat that he pets like Dr. Friggin' Evil to be a villain as well. It's almost as perfect as sharks with friggin' laser beams attached to their freaking heads. There's not much to say about Mick, but I just love him to pieces, and the fact that he survives the series to become Philip's pet cat is simply adorable. I just love the concept of a cat that can henshin, and all I can say is, more of this please. I want more Kamen Rider kitties. Kamen Kitty Rider is the best concept ever. But with that being said, I think I'm gonna save my opinions for the rest of the characters and my overall verdict for part 2. I know it may feel awkward to leave things off here for now, but trust me, if we did all of Double in one video, this review would have gone on forever, and God, I'm starting to get exhausted. So make sure to come back next time for part 2 of the Kamen Rider Double review, where I'll give you the definitive answer, once and for all, whether or not this show is worth your time. With that being said, I'm Zenith, Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and I will see you all next time. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that you too can join the Bun Squad, my legion of cute, fluffy bunnies that watch my videos, and don't forget to hit the bell so that you get notified of every new video. Have a good one, everybody.
Hey, Mommy?
Yes, what is it, Kana?
Well, I've been watching you review the show, and I wanted to ask you. Mick is a cat that can henshin to protect its daddy, right?
Yes, but you see, Kana, Mick is a bad kitty. He kills people. Until his memory is destroyed, then he's a good kitty again.
But Mommy, what if I learned how to henshin to protect you? I'm a good kitty, and I would be able to stop anyone who could harm you. Like a kitty rider. Kamen kitty. I like the sound of that.
Kana, baby, I love you, but there's no need to protect me. Nobody wants to hurt me. There's no need to worry. Besides, I don't know if I trust you with all of that power after the Cloverfield incident.
Oh, okay.
Silly little bun. Who'd want to hurt me anyhow?